Move it, old man. Some of us have places to be. The voice came sharp from the back of the line. Young Cocky rushed. The old bus driver didn't flinch. He just wiped the side mirror with a weathered cloth, same motion he'd made every morning for over a decade. Same boots, same silence, same route. But this morning, someone else was watching. A Navy recruit paused as he stepped onto the bus, squinting in the morning light. His eyes locked on something half-hidden beneath the rolled sleeve of the driver's faded jacket. A tattoo worn by time but unmistakable. The anchor, the eagle, the seal trident. The recruit's entire posture changed. His spine snapped straight. His voice dropped to a hush. "Sir?" And just like that, the entire bus fell silent. Every morning, just before dawn broke over the Gulf, Frank Malone pulled into the transit depot off Leopard Street with the same quiet rhythm he had followed for nearly 12 years. He didn't need an alarm. His body still woke him before the sun, just like it had in his service days. His movements were measured and spared no wasted energy. Coffee was always black, no sugar, shirt tucked in tight, boots polished though nobody ever noticed. Bus Nayarawa 4117 always left the yard at 5:25. Always. Rain, heat, tropical storm watches, it didn't matter. Frank drove his route like clockwork from the Marina District to the Naval Base perimeter and back, looping through downtown Corpus Christi with a steadiness that comforted the regulars and baffled the rookies. He spoke little, not out of rudeness, just habit. A nod here, a tap on the mirror there. His presence was felt more than heard. He didn't joke, didn't comment on the weather, didn't indulge in the light gossip that the other drivers at the depot traded over vending machine coffee. Just Old Man Malone, they called him. Some younger drivers joked he had a microchip in his skull that made him drive on autopilot. Others assumed he was retired Navy, just a grunt who never quite let go of his regimen. He wore a Navy windbreaker every day, not company issue. His boots, black and thick-soled, clashed with the uniform's brown shoes. He never took them off, even when off duty. They looked heavy, maybe custom-made. No one asked. The only thing anyone ever saw him do differently was roll up the left sleeve of his jacket just a bit right below the elbow. Some thought it was to cool down, some said arthritis, but he never rolled the other. Frank didn't smile much, but he wasn't grim either. There was something steady in him, something deeply still, like a pond that hadn't been touched in decades but still held things beneath the surface. The regulars respected him in that quiet Southern way. Folks who boarded every day at the same stops, the nurse from Christus Spohn, the widow who carried her husband's urn in her purse. The high school janitor nodded and whispered, "Mornin', mister." Malone, as they climbed aboard. He never corrected them that it was Frank or that he didn't care for Sir. He just drove. There wasn't a soul who could remember him being late, not even during the big freeze 4 years back when the overpasses iced and the city shut down. He was still there, salt on his boots, thermos in hand, checking mirrors with that same steady hand. To the world, Frank Malone was just a retired old man driving a bus on time. But to a handful of quiet observers, those who watched closely, there was something else. Something in the way he scanned intersections before changing lanes. The way he braced before tight corners. The way he checked every mirror at every stop, not once, but twice. It was subtle, invisible to most. But to someone trained, to someone with military eyes, Frank wasn't just driving a bus. He was still running ops. And that's exactly what one new passenger was about to notice. It was a Tuesday morning when Eli Navarro boarded the bus. Just 19, freshly minted from orientation, and still breaking in his boots, Eli stood straighter than most. His uniform was crisp, the scent of new fabric and starch still clinging to the fibers. He was polite, quiet, and attentive, not yet shaped by rank, but already molded by respect. He was stationed at the Naval Air Station for basic systems training, still trying to find his footing. Like many others, he had been told to catch the 5:45 bus on North Beach, and like everyone else, he didn't expect much from the driver. But that morning, as he stepped aboard, his eyes caught something most missed. It wasn't the boots, though. He noticed those two laced tight military spec, not the standard issue for a transit driver. It wasn't the way the older man scanned the mirrors with such precision, like he was tracking more than traffic. No, it was the arm. The driver's left sleeve was rolled just below the elbow, and in the narrow slice of weathered skin exposed beneath it, Eli spotted something. Ink. a shape. At first glance, it could have been any old tattoo. But Eli had been paying attention in briefings. He'd seen the charts, the insignias, the codes of brotherhood etched into muscle and bone. This one was unmistakable. A trident partially worn by time but intact. An eagle perched with wings spread. The anchor, the pistol, the seal emblem. Eli froze mid-step, his boots thunking lightly against the rubber floor of the bus. The driver didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't show it. He simply nodded, once turned his eyes to the mirror, and shifted the bus into motion. Eli took his seat near the front, heart pounding, suddenly unsure if he had just imagined it. But the details were too clear. That wasn't a decorative tattoo. It wasn't inked for flair. It was earned. And only one kind of man earned that. The ride was otherwise uneventful. The usual stops. The same quiet hum of early risers nodding off or scrolling their phones. Frank didn't speak. Eli didn't either. He spent the ride stealing glances, discreet, calculated, respectful, trying to make sense of the man in front of him. He noticed the posture, how the older man sat with his back never touching the seat shoulders squared, the way his eyes flicked to every passenger as they boarded, not with judgment, but evaluation. Like he was still calculating threat levels, like nothing about him had actually retired. When Eli stepped off at the base, he hesitated. He wanted to say something, to ask, to acknowledge. But something in the driver's silence told him it wasn't time. "Thank you, sir," Eli said quietly as he stepped down. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror for half a second. No smile, no nod. But he had heard it. The next morning, Eli sat in the same seat deliberately this time. The sunlight slanted differently through the windows, catching the man's forearm just right. There it was, the trident. Weathered. Real. He waited until the front of the bus emptied at the next stop, then leaned forward slightly. Voice low, just enough for the driver to hear. "Sir, were you—" The question didn't even need finishing. The man didn't turn. "I was." 2 words, nothing more. And that was when Eli Navarro knew this man wasn't just a driver. He was a shadow from a war most would never know. By noon that same day, Eli Navarro couldn't focus. His instructors at the naval station ran drills and briefings like clockwork, but Eli's mind was miles away, back on that bus, on that voice, on that ink. He couldn't shake the weight of it. So during a short break, he pulled aside Petty Officer Vance, a grizzled instructor with 24 years of scars and stories. Sir, Eli began hesitating. "Do you know if Frank Malone drives bus 417 into base each morning?" Vance arched a brow. Malone. "Sure, I see him in the mornings. Doesn't talk much. He has the trident," Eli said quietly. "Old," on his left forearm. He said, "I was when I asked." Vance's expression changed. The casual edge dropped. His voice lowered. "You sure?" Eli nodded. "I'd bet my uniform." Vance didn't reply, just stared off for a moment, then muttered, "No way." Within hours, whispers started making their way down the hallways and across chow tables. At first it was disbelief. "You mean the guy with the cap and the windbreaker?" "Nah." But then someone else confirmed it, an older logistics chief who'd seen the tattoo back in 2019. Then another remembered an old story passed around during cold weather training, a SEAL op in Panama, 1989. 6 teams surrounded. Extraction failed. Mission command went dark. They made it out. Every one of them. No air cover, no medevac, no backup. Just a name whispered in the after-action reports. Griggs, no Granger. No one could remember clearly, but then someone on the Navy forums found a redacted mention in an old Navy Times archive. Master Chief Frank Malone, SEAL Team 3, awarded Bronze Star with Valor mission details classified. The chatter reached further than the base. A retired SEAL instructor from Kingsville texted someone still active. "You hearing this story about a bus driver in Corpus?" "Yeah." "Frank Malone." "I thought he was dead." "Nope, just done." By the end of the week, the story had rippled through the barracks like a rising tide. The man who once ran black ops in Central America, who pulled out an entire fire team under sniper fire with a broken femur, was now steering a city bus through the Marina Loop. And every morning he rolled his left sleeve just below the elbow, not to show off, just enough so those who knew might recognize. One morning the routine changed. The bus arrived on time just like always. Same mirror check. Same silence. But at the third stop past the pier, a tall figure boarded. He wasn't in standard Navy gear. He wore full-dress blues. Rows of ribbons lined his chest like a historical archive. A silver seal trident gleamed beneath his nameplate, CMDR J. Westfield. Everyone on the bus froze. Frank didn't say a word, just glanced up through the mirror. Morning, the commander said, his voice calm but filled with weight. Permission to ride. Frank's hand never left the wheel. His eyes met Westfield's in the reflection. You got a seat, Commander. No one said another word. The younger sailors on board sat ramrod straight, suddenly hyper-aware that something sacred was happening. When the bus pulled to a stop by the naval station, CMDR, Westfield didn't stand right away. He remained at the front just behind Frank and leaned forward slightly. I reviewed the records, he said in a tone just above a whisper. You're the one from Operation Marlin. Frank exhaled slowly. That man's gone. Long time now. With all due respect, Sir Westfield replied, some legacies don't die. They just change uniforms. The commander stepped off without another word. And Frank? He simply checked the mirror again. The route wasn't finished. By the following Monday, the bus was different. Not the bus itself. Bus 417 was the same aging city coach with scuffed vinyl seats and faded handrails, but the way people treated it had changed. Something unspoken lingered in the air, the kind of reverence usually reserved for monuments or memorial walls. It began quietly. Young sailors and Marines started arriving early 10, sometimes 15 minutes before departure. No chatter, no phones, no earbuds. Just quiet, respectful stillness at the stop. They lined up in clean rows, not because they were told to, but because it felt right. When Frank Malone pulled in right on time as always, they boarded in silence. Each nodded with a subtle, almost ceremonial dip of the head. No good morning, no thank you, just presence, respect. Frank didn't change a thing, didn't acknowledge it, didn't adjust his sleeve or smile or say, I see what you're doing. He just drove. But the young service members noticed every detail. The precise stops, the smooth braking, the exact mirror scans. The fact that he never once had to double-check a street sign or ask directions, even during detours. One morning, a recruit quietly pulled a napkin from his pack and wiped down a coffee stain on a window. The next day, 2 others collected discarded water bottles at the back of the bus. By the end of the week, the bus was immaculate, cleaner than any in the fleet. No one had organized it. No one had asked. They just did it. A handful of civilians started to take notice. Some looked confused by the silent riders with military posture. Others rolled their eyes when the uniformed passengers stood for older women or picked up drop bags without hesitation. And then inevitably came someone who didn't understand. It happened on a humid Thursday afternoon. The bus was half full, mostly base-bound service members and a few off-duty workers. A teenage boy boarded headphones, blaring music cap backward, baggy hoodie drooping off one shoulder. He plopped down halfway down the aisle, legs stretched across the aisle, phone volume still cranked. As the bus rolled through Ocean Drive, he glanced at Frank's back and scoffed. Yo, Grandpa, can't this thing go any faster? I got places to be, man. A few passengers looked up but said nothing. Frank, as usual, said nothing either. Eyes forward, 2 hands on the wheel. Same silence. But Eli Navarro was sitting near the rear that day. Now in his 3rd month of training, Eli had grown quieter, stronger. He looked up slowly, removed one earbud, and turned in his seat. Watch your tone, he said evenly. Not raised, not angry, just calm. The teenager blinked. What Eli didn't repeat himself. That man bled so you could run your mouth on a public bus, he said. So maybe sit up, shut your music off, and learn a little something about respect. The teen went pale, fumbled for his phone. The music stopped. His head dropped. The rest of the bus remained silent. Frank didn't say anything, but in the mirror Eli saw something. A flicker in the driver's eyes. Not gratitude, Frank never sought that. Recognition. Approval perhaps. Barely visible. But there. From that day forward it was as if the entire route understood. Civilians who once ignored the driver now nodded quietly as they stepped off. City workers tipped their hats. Retired veterans who happened to ride stood a little straighter, as if remembering the man behind the wheel from another life. And Eli. He began journaling after each ride. Small notes, observations. Not just about Frank, but about how discipline could change a space. The bus wasn't just transportation anymore. It was a moving tribute to a man who never asked for one. By the second month, the story had spread beyond the base. It started small, a mention in the local VFW chapter's newsletter, a few curious whispers in the Corpus Christi City Hall break room. Then someone posted a blurry cell phone photo on Facebook. Bus 417 early morning light, a line of uniformed recruits boarding in perfect silence. The caption read simply, "There's a legend driving this route. SEALs ride it like it's sacred ground." Within hours, the post had hundreds of shares. Veterans chimed in. "I rode with him in 93, quietest man I ever met." Others asked questions. "Is this real? Who is he?" Local reporters came sniffing. One morning, a journalist from Channel 7 News showed up at the depot with a clipboard and camera in tow. She waited near Frank's bus as he completed his pre-road inspection, checking the tires, cleaning the mirrors, running through his checks like always. She smiled brightly, a little too rehearsed. "Mr. Malone, I'm with the local news. We'd love to do a feature on your military service and the impact you're clearly having." Frank didn't even pause. "No interviews," he said, simply reaching for the latch on the side panel. "Sir, I think a lot of young people could learn from your story, especially the ones serving now." "It's not my story they need," he interrupted, this time meeting her eyes. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was final. He didn't elaborate, just closed the panel and moved on. She left 5 minutes later, her questions unanswered, her cameraman shaking his head in quiet admiration. That interview never aired, but the story kept spreading quietly, steadily, like the man himself. At City Hall, someone suggested naming the transit center after him. A councilman whose daughter was stationed at the naval base offered to make it official. Frank declined. Politely, firmly, no names, no dedications. But he couldn't stop what happened next. One misty Friday morning, just before the 5:45 departure, a small crowd gathered near Frank's usual stop at the North Beach Loop. City workers in orange vests, a Navy officer in full dress, a handful of veterans, a few civilians, and off to the side, two older men stood holding a covered bronze plaque. They didn't make a speech. They didn't cut a ribbon. They simply mounted it beside the bus shelter, brushed the dust from its edge, and stepped back. The plaque was understated. No portrait, no fanfare, just a few engraved words for those who serve in silence, in honor of Frank Malone and every warrior who never needed applause. Frank saw it later that morning. He didn't stop, didn't touch it, but he stood straighter as he pulled the bus away from the curb. A few of his passengers saw it, just the smallest shift in posture. That was his thank you. The plaque was photographed by tourists the following week. It made its way onto a military subreddit. Then a Navy vet posted about it on LinkedIn. That post was picked up by a veterans nonprofit and shared across the country. Suddenly, the quiet man in Corpus Christi was being talked about in bases from San Diego to Norfolk. But Frank Malone kept his routine. Same boots, same silence, same route. And somehow that made the respect deepen. He wasn't trying to be noticed, wasn't correcting people or giving lectures. He simply showed up every day and did his work with honor. It reminded people of something they'd forgotten, that heroism doesn't always wear medals. Sometimes it wears a transit badge and carries a cloth for wiping mirrors. The city didn't rename the depot. They didn't put his face on a billboard. But the bus, that old bus 417, to everyone who rode it now, especially those in uniform, it wasn't just a ride anymore. It was a place you stood taller, because the man at the wheel reminded you how. It was a Monday when Frank didn't show up. For the first time in 12 years, bus 417 pulled into the depot with a different driver behind the wheel. No one had seen it coming. There was no notice, no announcement, no substitute names scribbled on the transit board. Just absence. The replacement was competent enough. Young Polite did his job by the book, but the difference was immediate. Subtle things: how the bus braked a little too hard at the turns, how the stops were a few seconds late, how the mirrors weren't adjusted with the same meticulous care. The silence, too, felt different. It wasn't reverent, now it was uncertain. Hollow, as if everyone was waiting for something that wouldn't come. The service members, who had come to treat bus 417 like sacred ground, were quiet that morning. Eyes scanning the mirrors, the dashboard, the driver's seat, looking for any trace of the man who'd made this route something more than routine. Frank Malone was gone, and no one knew why. Tuesday came. Still no Frank. By Wednesday, whispers started again. Maybe he retired. Maybe he finally took a vacation. Maybe something happened. But no one said what they were truly thinking. That maybe the old warrior had made his final departure. Then Thursday morning arrived. Bus 417 pulled into the depot at 5:25 a.m. on the dot. And Frank Malone was back behind the wheel. Same boots, same windbreaker, same steady silence. But there was something different. Right behind his seat, secured with reverent care, sat a triangular wooden display case. Inside it, a perfectly folded American flag, the kind they only hand out once, the kind that never comes back with the soldier who earned it. He didn't speak, he didn't acknowledge it, but every passenger who stepped aboard that morning saw it, and every single one understood. Someone close to Frank, someone from that world he never spoke of, was gone. Maybe a teammate, maybe a brother in arms, maybe the last of his old unit. No one asked. No one needed to. The silence that filled the bus that morning was unlike any before. It wasn't just respectful, it was sacred. The air seemed heavier, the engine quieter. The hum of the tires on asphalt felt distant, like the world outside had paused in mourning. No one touched their phones. No one spoke. At the back of the bus, Eli Navarro sat with his cap in his hands pressed gently to his chest. Others followed suit, military and civilian alike. A nurse placed her hand over her heart. A high schooler removed his headphones, holding them silently in his lap. Even the construction worker, who usually dozed off during the route, sat upright. His gaze fixed out the window, jaw clenched. No commands were given. No gestures were made. It just happened, because grief has its own language. And in that moment, they were all fluent. Frank drove like he always did, mirrors turns, shifting gears steady as ever. But every move seemed a little more deliberate, a little more measured. At each stop, passengers boarded quietly and instinctively lowered their voices when they saw the flag. No one dared speak to him directly, except for Eli, who just before stepping off at the base paused at the front, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir." Frank didn't respond, but he met Eli's eyes in the mirror, and that was enough. For the next few days, the flag remained behind the seat, untouched, polished, honored in its quiet place. Nothing was said about it at the depot. No announcements, no emails, no protocol. But every driver gave Frank space. Every mechanic double-checked his bus before he arrived. No one dared park in his spot. The unspoken truth settled across the route like fog. Frank had buried someone. And yet he came back, just as he always had. And in doing so, he taught every young man and woman in uniform watching him that strength isn't just found in medals or battles or missions accomplished. It's found in showing up the next day, even with a flag behind your seat, even when your heart is heavier than your hands. Frank Malone never gave speeches, but that week he said more than most men ever could. The memo from the Transit Authority was short, one paragraph, no bold print, no farewell flyer. Operator Frank Malone to retire effective Friday, final route on bus 417. That was it, just another line on a clipboard for most. But for the men and women who rode with him, those who knew what his silence carried, it meant the end of something sacred. And they weren't about to let it pass unnoticed. Friday morning dawned early and cool, with mist clinging to the street signs and a hush in the depot yard that felt almost ceremonial. At 5:25 a.m., sharp bus 417 rolled out of the garage one last time. Frank Malone was at the wheel, same boots, same rolled sleeve, same expressionless resolve. But today, something in the air told him he wouldn't be driving alone. As the bus turned the corner onto the outbound lane, the lot came into view. And there they stood. Two lines, shoulder to shoulder, stretching from the garage doors to the far curb. Over 40 men and women, all active duty or recently discharged. No uniforms, just civilian clothes, jeans, boots, polos, worn jackets. But every stance straight, every chin high. They didn't wave. They didn't clap. They simply stood in perfect formation, heads turned as the bus passed in complete silence. Some held their caps over their hearts. A few held nothing at all, but everything about them spoke of respect. Frank didn't slow. He didn't need to. He simply drove forward, his face unreadable, but his hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual. And in the mirror, his eyes blinked just once longer than they had in years. The route that morning was different. Every seat was filled, not with commuters or sleepy students or grumbling tourists, but with those who had worn the uniform. Some were young, some gray-haired, some still bore the weight of deployments on their faces. Some rode in silence, others nodded quietly to each other, bound by something deeper than rank or time. No one spoke above a whisper. No one checked their phone. It was the quietest ride the city of Corpus Christi had ever seen. When the bus reached its final stop at the depot, something unexpected waited. The other buses, usually scattered in rows or idle in service bays, had been parked in a formation angled in a V around a new stone monument placed in the center of the yard. At the base of the granite slab, carved without flourish, were 10 words heroes don't announce themselves. They drive the route every day. Frank stared at it for a moment, said nothing, then powered down the bus, clicked off the brake, and stood up. He picked up a small duffel from behind the seat, the same one he'd carried in and out every shift, and slung it over his shoulder. He moved toward the open door, but waiting at the bottom of the steps was Eli Navarro. Only now Eli wasn't the raw recruit he once was. He wore khakis and a Navy windbreaker silver insignia gleaming faintly at his collar. Time had hardened his stance, broadened his shoulders, but his eyes still held the same sharpness from that first morning. "Need a ride, Commander?" he asked with a small smile, gesturing to a parked navy blue pickup behind him. Frank paused. No reaction, then gave the slightest nod. "Appreciate it, Lieutenant." They walked in silence toward the truck. Passengers from the bus had disembarked and now stood in two lines again, this time framing the path as Frank walked between them. No one saluted. No one spoke. But each one stood at full attention until he passed. As Frank climbed into the passenger seat, he glanced at the dashboard. There it sat, a single challenge coin, polished and unmistakable. The insignia of SEAL Team 3. On the back, in small engraved script, "For those who never stop serving." No name attached, but Eli knew who had left it. Senator James H. Morrison, former SEAL head of the Armed Services Committee. He had boarded bus 417 just once months ago and said nothing. Frank picked up the coin, turned it once in his hand, and then placed it back. He said nothing. The truck pulled out of the lot and disappeared down the early morning road. That afternoon, a photo appeared in a military newsletter, grainy black and white. It showed Frank Malone walking away from the bus duffel over his shoulder, with 40 service members standing behind him in silent formation. The caption read, "Commander Frank Malone, SEAL, mentor, driver, legend." No speeches needed. And in the halls of naval bases from coast to coast, new recruits would hear his name, not shouted, not celebrated, but spoken quietly, like a lesson passed from one soldier to another. Because honor doesn't need volume. It just needs someone who shows up every morning and drives the route. In today's world, where headlines fade in minutes and recognition is measured in likes and views, it's easy to overlook the quiet ones, the men and women who never ask for applause, who just keep showing up. Frank Malone was one of them. He didn't want a plaque. He didn't give speeches. He never even told his full story. But through routine respect and silent discipline, he reminded an entire generation of service members, and maybe even this whole town, that real character isn't loud. It's steady. It's consistent. It's humble. And it's needed now more than ever. You don't have to wear a uniform to follow Frank's example. Maybe you're the one who always checks on your neighbor. Maybe you're the grandparent who shows up to every game, rain or shine. Maybe you're the clerk who remembers names and birthdays. In a culture where it's easier to talk than to listen, to promote than to serve, what Frank taught us is simple. True greatness is measured not in moments, but in mornings. So we'd like to ask you, who is the Frank Malone in your life? Have you known someone who carried the weight of the world with quiet strength and never asked for credit? Or maybe you were raised by one. Or maybe you are one. Leave a comment below and tell us your story. We want to hear it. And if this story moved you, if it made you sit a little straighter or think a little deeper, please give it a like, share it with someone who'd understand, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Thank you for listening. And wherever you are, whatever your role, remember, Excellence isn't loud. It's what shows up before dawn, every day, without fail.